Hello and welcome to this literacy performance seminar where I'll be taking you through some of the introductory levels of looking at the YARC, that's the York Assessment for Reading Comprehension, the Adaptive Digital Group Reading Test, NGRT, and a quick look also at the Dyslexia Screener Assessments. My name's Phil Wyman and I'm the GLE Assessment Training Manager. Okay, let's have a look at some of the slides for this. To start off, I just want to give a kind of background type rationale for why perhaps literacy and reading is so important. I know I'm preaching very much to the converted here, but it's very important to look at literacy and reading because this is something that's right across the curriculum. It doesn't matter what subject is being taught within school, that often the vast majority of the work that's done on that subject is done via the medium of English language, and it very much depending on how the student is able to understand that literacy, understand that vocabulary, to be able to put down in writing for themselves their understanding of the subject, and to speak and listen to the teacher, all done through this medium. So if we are to perhaps allow access for subject material, we must make sure that literacy is addressed. And this will have a cascade effect across the whole school. And really, if I was to recommend a first level sort of across school approach to raising performance, I would look at raising literacy standards. And of course, if we're going to do that, then the first step, of course, in any journey is knowing where you are. It's all very well knowing where you want to be, but where you are now will guide you into what needs doing. Okay, so let's just also place where the particular assessments fit into a kind of scheme for this. Really for us, the assessments split up into group administered assessments and those that are individual administered assessments. Now, the group ones are not that they read out loud in a large group, but more that they are administered to groups. In fact, those kind of group assessments, those kind of screening level assessments, the child doesn't actually speak at all. I suppose the very lowest level of that might be represented by an assessment we don't actually look at today, which is the Suffolk Reading Scale, which approaches this assessment of reading completely via sentence completion. And then at the other end of the scale of this assessment would be an individual assessment, and these really would be more reserved for those students that we identified by using the screener, that we could actually go into a lot more detail and work with that student individually. So hence individual assessment. Within those assessments, the child does read out loud, which allows us to be more diagnostic of the kind of reading errors that they're making. Obviously, with that increased depth, they are longer, and that's why they are really reserved for those individuals that we've identified through a screening assessment. And then in between, I suppose, would be something like new group reading test. The new group reading test is group administered, but it has both sentence completion sections and comprehension questions. So we are looking at a wider look at reading in general. However, again, the student does not read out loud, so that diagnostic miscue, you may know it as, it is not there. Okay, so let's start with the new group reading test, I think. So, according to that kind of breakdown we just had a look at, the new group reading test is that middle ground. If we just have a look at this diagram, which I think gives a nice visual look at what I mean by an extended look at reading. If we really are going to look at the reading skills of students, we really are aiming to see that they can both decode, that they can pick up lexical, semantic clues to their reading, but they can also read to understand, and that understanding can be addressed through the comprehension questions that New Group Reading Test has in addition to the sentence completion. Obviously, in sentence completion, you still have to have an element of understanding and vocabulary, because if you don't know what the sentence means, and you don't know what the individual choice words mean, then you can't fit them into that sentence. But that's not quite the same as looking at the kind of comprehension you get in the comprehension section of New Group Reading Test, which includes different types of understanding, including inference. So on that little graph there, that normal or good reading would be off to the top right hand side, where comprehension was high, as well as their ability to pick up on those clues or even decode. Some also suggest that those whose perhaps listening comprehension is high, but their ability to actually mechanically read is poor, would fit dyslexics. Okay. So, what about the actual makeup of New Group Reading Test? Well, there are a number of tests. For most of the age groups, there are 2 tests, and for one of them, in year 1, there's just the one. The double testing, as it were, allows retesting more frequently than once a year, and it allows us parallel forms. Now, what parallel forms are similar forms of questions. They will give different raw scores, but they will be standardized in conjunction with each other, so that we can compare their standardized scores and reading ages. It lives up to its name, New Group Reading Test, because it's very new and revised content, and the language is about as contemporary as you can get. And it was designed by the leading groups in education for reading here, and does reflect the way that reading is taught specifically in the UK, but that's also across internationally. And the norms are up to date, however, UK based. So, quick overview of the New Group Reading Test. It is group administration. I think we've tried to explain that the reason for that it is more diagnostic than sentence completion. However, if you're looking for particular miscue analysis, you do need to go to individual administration with the child reading out loud. But that's not always a good idea when you've got lots of people to screen. No writing is required, as you might expect. We don't want to put extra barriers in the way. It is multiple choice format. Scored by GL assessment. It's online. You can do it online. You can get the results instantaneously online. It is available by paper, and I would suggest scoring by GL also, because of the wealth of data and the way that it's presented would take weeks of work, which is really better dedicated to the actual teaching of the children. Parallel versions we've just spoken about, sentence completion and passage comprehension, and UK standardization. The structure of the test then, well, test 1, the one for the very youngest age, is slightly different to the older group. So if I just mentioned, this is one test, no parallel test of this, and it's meant to be administered in small groups. There is a phonics section as well for those that are pre-passage reading, together with the sentence completion section and a simple passage comprehension of 9 items of comprehension. At higher levels, we've said that there are parallel tests. Now I've put on this slide test 2 and above. There are slight variations in number of items within the various levels, but I think to get a good idea of this, we're talking about it being about 45 minutes long and there being approximately 50 items in total, built up, as we said before, of sentence completion and then passage comprehension, so the children actually read a passage to themselves and then there are following questions about that passage, and they are fact and fiction, so there's always two different approaches, narrative and non-narrative approaches. We do find that children's facility to actually access information in those two forms does differ. Here's a screenshot from the new group reading test. If yours is quite as small as mine on here and your eyesight's anything like mine, you won't be able to read it particularly well, but the passage is on the left hand side and then questions are presented one at a time. Some are directly look-upable, if that's such a phrase. You can refer back to the text and find the actual items. Some require inference, literal inference sometimes more complex inference, the whole spectrum of inferential questions as well as more literal questions. That's, as you can see, a much lower level, and then it's from the sentence completion. So again, it's exactly what it says. You get a short sentence, sometimes a longer sentence, depending on age group, and then a number of options that you can choose to best complete that sentence. And I think back here we're to another screenshot showing the initial part of passage comprehension, where we actually are still doing sentence completion, but it's in the form of a more open bit of text passage. Okay, so new group reading test, that's where it fits into the kind of middle ground. I would say that in fact it would be an excellent starter screener, because it is a screener, it can be group administered, but it's giving you the next level up in terms of information and really looking at proper reading alongside reading for comprehension. Okay, there are going to be some that you identify that's going to be quite a large mismatch between their chronological age and their reading age, and it's these that really I would suggest that we're singling out. All those that have been referred to you by other members of staff or through your own knowledge you might think are worth having a look at. And for those, you really need an individual reader, and these, we said, are more diagnostic. And the one we're going to have a look at now is the York assessment for reading comprehension, sometimes called YARC. The acronym's pretty straightforward, but I think it is just worth pointing out in its name. It's called the York assessment because it was actually developed with the literacy education team at York University, considered the leading group for this kind of assessment. Okay, well, there you are. See, I'm a little bit premature because I've actually told you much of the information that's on that slide. The primary edition, which is the one I'm concentrating on initially, was published in January 2009. I still consider it very, very new. Certainly the vocabulary, everything was brought up to date and standardized. There is a secondary or older age group York assessment, and that was published I think 2 years later, so around 2011. Okay. Within the York assessment then for primary, the primary core test is made up of passage reading. That's for ages 5 to 11 and will give us 3 separate reading ages, 3 different measures of reading ability. One for accuracy, and we use the miscue analysis for that, omissions, repetitions, and so on. One, you don't have to do all these 3 sections if you don't want 3 different measures, but they are available. One for rate, so we actually time how quickly they read the passages, and comprehension based around those different types of comprehension questions. With the primary version also is an early reading section. This is for students, pupils who aren't up to reading an entire passage, and there we do look more around those skills that are pre-passage reading, early word reading, letter sound knowledge, phonological awareness type questions, and I've got some examples on the next few slides. Okay, so let's start with that, be somewhat logical and start with that early reading section. Ages 5 to 7, single word reading, yes, there are word recognition questions up to 30 items. The number of items actually varies with the age, and we start at different positions, if you like, for different age groups. Letter sound knowledge. Yeah, single letters and digraphs as well. This is initial sounds, say stamp, say became without the so here we're pretty much living up to what it says, the initial sounds of words, pretty simple words. Sound deletion and word deletion we also look at. Starfish, say it again but don't say fish. All of these sections are teacher-led, so there are examples. Note the child doesn't go into any of the subsections cold. Sound isolation, where we actually look at the first sound, that children are asked to actually say what the first sound sounds like, and also ends of words as well, final sounds. There's some of the words that are in that simple single word recognition. Now if we have a look at the higher up level, but the actual children, and when I say higher up, it could be even quite young children who can cope with passages. If they can cope with passages, they should be reading the passages. So features of the passage reading, similar to before, we said that it has 3 different measures. I've said enough on that, I think. I should say that it's also code-normed with that early reading, so we'll be able to directly compare standardised scores and reading ages. It's virtually like having one test split into 2 rather than 2 separate tests. Okay, now the passages, there are a number of different passages, and these are easily relatable to particular age groups, but really our recommendation is to use a cut down version of what's called the single word reading test, which is included as part of the package. And if you do that first, it is single words, so there's a list of words and the child gets as far through that list of words as they are able, and then there's a table in the manual that links the number of words that they've successfully read from that to which passages to use within the assessment. So that's really the best way, and then the child is only exposed to passages that are suitable to them, not too hard and not too easy. And we need to do a pair of passages, so we've got the factual and the fiction and narrative and the non-narrative section together. The comprehension questions that go with it, I've said, are literal and inferential, and even the types of inferential are broken up. And within the reporting online, there's actually, you can see very clearly for individuals how many questions of each type of inference they got right. It allows a great deal of drilling down. Okay, 2 parallel forms. Yes, we need to be able to do it perhaps more frequently without the child building up familiarization with a particular passage. Although, you know, this isn't a test that you know, we'd perhaps be doing every few weeks. It might be that you want to administer one form to have active intervention and then retest using the other form. That's fine, but not for a huge repeating cycle. So decoding errors and so on. Sometimes people ask, why are the children allowed to look back at the passage to answer comprehension questions? Really, that is part of the comprehension. It's not a giant sort of memory test or working memory test. It's about their understanding of the text, and if they can go back to it and reread or look for particular items, that's fine. And because there are so many inferential questions, there won't be everything that they can look up anyway. It will be very much taking the text as is and applying it to their understanding. This is the very first passage, some of it in lowercase, some of it in uppercase. The children read the bits that are in large print. I said uppercase, how stupid of me, it's actually just a larger font. The children read the ones that are in the larger font with the kind of star by the side. So it's a bit of shared reading. The assessor reads the part in the smaller font. We do that so that there's enough text between the two so that the child can answer comprehension questions of it. I mean, if you imagine taking out the teacher bits, they'd just be 3 short sentences, and it'd be very hard to come up with a sufficient number of comprehension questions based on that alone. Whereas if there's a bit of shared reading, there's more to be understood, so we can ask about it without putting that burden of reading on the child. So literal questions, those are ones that can actually be looked up within the text. What day does the story take place, and so on. I think actually those are reference to a slightly different story. The story that they're referenced to is one of. Let me have just a quick look. No, it isn't. That's fine. It is reference to that story, so they can be looked up. What day does it take place on? Where did the postcard land? And so on. And then the inference questions might be, I mean, you didn't have time to read the passage, but the little boy got a postcard from Grandma, and it talked about, she was glad that she took her umbrella. So one of the questions might be, what was the weather like on Grandma's trip? It doesn't actually say what the weather was. It doesn't even mention the weather. It doesn't mention that within the text. You have to use the text to understand that she was pleased she took her umbrella, what umbrellas are used for, and hence get the answer. Okay. Did I move forward 2 there? I'm just going to have to check. Excuse me a sec. Yes, I did. This is a level 2 passage here that it's not shared reading. The child themselves read it out, read it out loud, and the kind of errors they make in reading out loud, like substituting words or coming to words and not saying them, refusals, missing words out, and changing words in forms of substitution, or to go together to make the miscue analysis or diagnostics. Anyway, I think that's about big and little cats. Okay. This is just not a screenshot, but a scan of the teacher's record book. So it also gives the text of the story there as well, where you can actually make a note of the types of miscue errors that they're making, which you'll need to do as part of the analysis for accuracy. And then there are the questions that make up the comprehension, and you also write the child's response. 2 reasons for that. You are checking it against the kind of list of acceptable responses or similar responses that will get you the mark, but also this forms a permanent record of the assessment you did, and sometimes it's quite interesting and important to look at what the child actually does say. It may be wrong, but what they do say may give you hints to the problems they have in understanding that question. If you are going to have a look at this marking yourself, which is fine because this is an individual reader, so it's not done online, so there's not the online reporting. There is, however, a dedicated website with a scoring tool for this, so really it is only a matter of looking up, finding the particular scores for the sections, putting them once into this scoring program on that internet site along with the child's details, and it will actually plot up and work out standardized scores, age equivalents, confidence bands, even plot it up as a little table and show you the I think you can make it out, because I can make it out, the analysis, the diagnostic miscue of where they are having those kinds of errors. We can also add in our own observations from the assessment themselves, you know, which may include things like, oh, they were recovering from a cold, or they were so on. Anything really that affects the results of the assessment, plus anything that you might observe that was particularly telling. Okay, let's just have a look now then. Oh, before I do, what I haven't got a slide, because I was going to just mention it, is that, as I said at the start, let me just move it back so you're not confused. When I said very much at the start of the York assessment, what we'll be focusing on is the primary and pre-reading. There is a secondary or older group which starts at 11, and that goes all the way through to 17, reading ages of 17. Similar methodology, except that I will point out the main difference there is that in the higher level paper, it's actually silent reading. So unless you are aware of particular reading problems where you'll be looking at the supplementary passages which have diagnostics, if you're looking at the main body of the test, the children actually read silently. And that's because that's what they do in school. You know, if they're 12, 13, 14, they're not reading out loud, they're reading to themselves. So it's important that we approach that reading in the same way. Okay, so now if we have a look at the dyslexia screener, I know the title says dyscalculia screen, don't worry, I'm not going to look at the maths part of this, just the dyslexia screener part. Okay, now I'm going to approach this via the kind of reports you get from the dyslexia screener. This one, I don't really want you to look at this and think of it, oh, this is what I get in a parent-carer report. Just for this initial slide, that's not my focus. I've got it up there because this actually shows, in those little diagrams beneath, the sections that make up dyslexia screener. So there are 6 subtests, and each one is separate in that they take about 10, 12, 15 minutes. So they're very doable in any slot. Let's say you're special educational needs and you see a child regularly, but for short periods, it'd be really good that you could do small sections one at a time, and then when they've done them all, you can report and get that overall report. And it's quite fine to come out of each subsection, stop, and then do another one. You can just carry on if you've got a longer section. Anyway, it's that flexibility. So in the first one, we've got missing pieces. This is very much a kind of visual way of looking at non-verbal reasoning. It's an ability test, an ability subtest. And then the next subtest is word sounds. Here we're presented initially with pictures of objects, people, things, and we talk about the way the initial sounds, end sounds, and so on. So that's phonological awareness based. The third subtest is about how they actually spell, and this spelling section is a measure of performance, so it's literacy performance. And then we sort of repeat. We've got subtest 4 is a visual search. So this is all about processing visual representations, and it's orientated around speed of visual search. Yeah. So this again, you could consider it an ability. So that pairs up nicely with the missing pieces. And from a statistical point of view, where we have pairs of tests, we get increased accuracy, reliability, and validity. And then subtest 5, a test of reading, sentence completion, putting words into sentences to best make sense, paired up with that other performance test in the first section, which is spelling. And then vocabulary. Here we've got, again, there are little pictures and they're often little scenarios, but we're actually looking for particular vocabulary. I suppose you could consider it as a kind of verbal reasoning. Okay, so that little reminder is part of one of the reports, one that goes to parents and carers and really does what I've done for you. Very simply explains the subsections that make up the test itself and why they're there. But anyway, let's do it look at the reports in perhaps a more structured way. So individual reports. Yes, so we can get reports for the individual child. They can be teacher-orientated, practitioner-orientated, which are detailed and include recommendations for next steps. I wouldn't want you to think of this as a scheme of work, simply where to look next. There's so much material out there for dyslexia, really, that I think it would be overkill for us to reference a particular text, where you might be much more happy to use an assessment or measures that you already have in place. There's also the parent-carer report, what we've seen part of already, and there's a further overview which explains terminology, although I should say that in the parent-carer report we have tried to minimize statistical vocabulary. There's a dyslexia index, which runs from no signs of dyslexia to possible mild signs of dyslexia, up to possible signs of severe dyslexia, where we would recommend that something a little bit more diagnostic than this screener was used to confirm that, and also, if it is confirmed, to look at next steps. Another handy little thing on the internet, also on the part of the online version, are the further guidance and letter templates. They are templates that can be sent out to parents that explain more about what's been done and the findings and why we've been doing it. And they can be individualized to individual pupils. Okay, so if you were using the online version, you get a little screen that pops up asking what kind of report, and we've pretty much said about the individual reports, although we will look at them again. But also there's a group report. In the group report, unsurprisingly, we can look at the results of all the children that we've tested using this assessment and make comparisons if we wish, but at least it stores them all in the same place as an overview. And we can also export them in the form of a data file, an Excel or a CSV file, which allows you to sort, filter, put into your own systems, do as you wish, really. In terms of group report, yes, that still comes with an overview, because we need to ensure that people who are using this are familiar with standardized age scores, terms like STANINE, National Percentile Rank, raw score, the index itself. You remember me mentioning that there are letter codes. Did I say there were letter? There are letter codes from A to E, where A is no signs of dyslexia, and so on. Okie dokie. So that's a group report. It's an incomplete one. Not everybody's done every part of the 6 tests. Some haven't even started, but you can see the format, how it, sorry about this, but how it groups that data and allows you to keep on top of the admin for a group. Individual reports, I have pretty much mentioned them, but I do need to make an important thing. This is a screener. I wouldn't want people to be going away and making decisions, yes or no, for dyslexia from this. This is a first step filtering. Then we go on and do something more diagnostic. There is an individual report for teacher practitioner, exactly the same in terms of explaining terminology. But alongside that, there's actually this graphical representation of individual, graphical bar chart, histogram representation of the individual scores within those 6 areas. So in this one, for instance, this person was well above average for visual search, but in terms of their reading and spelling, quite depressed. It's actually come out as a dyslexia index of C, which is a middle score here. You know, that from this it would be suggested that it's worth a follow-up. Yeah. Stay 9s, standardized age scores, percentile ranks. Here those recommendations are put into text, so it actually personalises it for the person, dyslexia index again, but with recommendations. Initially, one that this should be reassessed using something a bit more diagnostic, but there are other recommendations on there, as you can see. Parents get a similar kind of representation, but without that statistical vocabulary, and instead concentrating on whether the scores are above average, below average, and so on. But it does need explaining. So again, there is explanation with recommendations. That's just the first slide I used in this. It's just in its proper place now, where it goes out with a parent-carer report to just clarify what was in the test. And I think that's pretty much it. Have we got questions come through, Vicky? No, okay, it's one of these that isn't a yes or a no. It's a bit of a, let's just have a little think about it, and that is, if they're up to reading passages, it will have no effect at all, because the phonics is only offered as pre-passage reading, either because of their age, or because in the online version, which is adaptive, the computer has actually discovered that they're unable to answer questions that are passage based. It will automatically switch to the phonics. However, if it does switch to phonics, or you're offering the phonics paper, well, the paper is about phonics awareness. And I think the key is in the awareness. If the child is aware of phonics, and the more that they are aware of how to use phonics, the better they will do in that section. Up to a limit, of course, you can't go beyond, you know, understanding. But if they're at a lower level, let's say we have 2 different pupils at a similarly low level, and one had more exposure to phonics, I think perhaps there probably would be a slight advantage, because they would be aware of the kind of processes they're being asked about, you know, initial sounds and so on, and that would be more familiar.